I'll defend you. The black maid who saved a mafia boss after his lawyer abandoned him in court. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. The case was about to reach its boiling point, and the defendant, Dante Romano, sat at the center of it all. As the youngest mafia boss in New York, he had made a name for himself by building an empire that few dared challenge. His sharp suits and colder demeanor made him a figure to be feared. But today, he was just a man, desperate for someone to believe in him. His lawyer had just walked out. Without a word, without explanation, his lawyer abandoned him in the middle of the most important trial of his life. The case was a high-stakes one, with accusations that could tear apart everything he had worked for. His reputation was on the line. His freedom was at risk. The courtroom erupted into murmurs as the judge looked at Dante, clearly unimpressed by the sudden absence of his legal representation. A few of the jury members exchanged glances, while others appeared disinterested, some even amused. Dante's mind raced. He had built this empire through cold calculation and ruthless decisions. But now, sitting here without a lawyer, he felt vulnerable for the first time in years. His empire was no longer enough to protect him. He needed someone, anyone, to step in and save him. As the judge called for a brief recess, Dante remained seated, his eyes scanning the room. His usual confidence seemed to fade as he realized the gravity of the situation. He had no legal defense, no backup, and no way out. The room was filled with faces that seemed to relish in his discomfort. Dante's eyes wandered to the back of the room, where Maya, the black maid who had worked for his family for months, stood quietly, her head down as she nervously adjusted her uniform. She had no business being here, but Dante noticed her presence, an unexpected familiarity among the sea of strangers. Maya had never been part of the business world. She was a quiet, reserved woman who kept to herself, doing her job without drawing attention. Yet, in that moment, something shifted. Her eyes met his, and for a brief second, she saw a glimpse of the man beneath the cold, mafia boss exterior. She saw the vulnerability in his gaze, the helplessness that mirrored her own struggles. Maya had a past of her own. She had been a lawyer before, but a tragic mistake had ruined her career, forcing her into a life of servitude. Now, she stood in this courtroom, a mere maid, yet something inside her stirred. She could not ignore the injustice unfolding before her. The fear in Dante's eyes pulled at her, a call to action she couldn't ignore. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her heart racing as she addressed the judge. "I might be able to help." The words hung in the air for a moment, drawing curious glances from everyone in the room. Dante's eyes widened in disbelief. This woman, this maid, had just offered to help him? It was a bold move, one that no one, least of all Dante, had expected. The judge, clearly taken aback, paused before nodding his head. "You're welcome to speak," he said, though there was skepticism in his tone. Maya stepped into the spotlight, all eyes now on her. She knew she had to act quickly and decisively. She had no legal credentials, no experience in a courtroom in years, but she had something far more valuable: knowledge. As she looked at the case file in front of her, something clicked. The missing clause, the one that no one had noticed, was the key to winning the case. Dante had been set up, manipulated by those who sought to destroy him. And Maya, a woman who had once been at the top of her game, knew exactly how to fight back. As the room fell silent, Maya laid out her findings, her voice steady but filled with determination. She explained the legal loophole, how the evidence against Dante could be turned around with the right argument. She detailed the clause that had been hidden in the case file, one that would ultimately lead to the dismissal of the charges against him. The courtroom, once filled with doubt and mockery, now stood still, captivated by the power of her words. Dante watched in stunned silence as Maya, a mere maid, took control of the situation, using her intelligence to turn the tide in his favor. This was the moment everything changed. No one had expected her to be the one to save him, But Maya had just become his lifeline. She had taken a chance, stepping into a world that had never been hers, to defend a man who had never seen her as anything more than a servant. As the judge called for another recess to review Maya's findings, Dante couldn't help but feel a surge of respect for her. The woman who had once been invisible in his eyes had just become his savior. And in that moment, Dante Romano realized that sometimes it's the people we least expect who change our lives forever. As the judge called for a brief recess, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The murmurs of disbelief and confusion rippled through the room as everyone processed what had just happened. Maya, the maid who had been dismissed as insignificant by everyone in the room, had just single-handedly turned the tide of a high-stakes case. Dante, the Mafia boss who had sat there helplessly just moments before, now found himself at the mercy of a woman he barely knew, a woman who had come from the shadows to save him. He couldn't quite comprehend it. How had she done it? How had Maya, a mere maid, uncovered the legal flaw that everyone else had missed? He had seen her around his mansion for months, always quiet, always doing her job without a word. He had never paid much attention to her, until now. And now, as the recess continued, he couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Maya than he had ever imagined. Maya stood at the back of the courtroom, her heart racing in her chest. She had done it. She had actually done it. She, a woman who had been invisible for so long, had just saved one of the most powerful men in the city from a fate worse than losing his empire. But as the room cleared and the brief break stretched on, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this one act of courage, had changed everything. She had been a lawyer once, before her career had been shattered by a mistake she could never undo. Now, in this courtroom, with all eyes on her, she felt a surge of the person she used to be. Confident, powerful, in control. Dante's gaze never left her. He studied her carefully, wondering what kind of woman had just stepped up to save him. Maya was not the typical figure he was used to in his world. She wasn't one of his men, one of the well-dressed businessmen who bowed to his every command. She was something different. She was smart, resourceful, and brave. And for the first time in years, Dante felt a flicker of something more than his usual icy resolve. He had been in control of everything for so long. But this woman, this maid, had just taken charge in a way that he hadn't even been able to. A part of him respected that. Another part of him felt something else, something he couldn't name. Maya, for her part, tried to push those thoughts aside. She was just doing her job, right? She was just a maid who happened to know a thing or two about the law. As the recess ended and everyone filed back into the courtroom, the judge returned to his seat, ready to continue the proceedings. Dante stood, his presence still as commanding as ever, but now, he had something new in his corner. Maya had become a wild card in a game that had seemed all but lost. She had saved him, and for that, she had earned his attention. As the trial resumed, Maya stood a little taller, her head slightly raised. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for certain. Things were different now. She wasn't invisible anymore. The case continued, but Dante, with Maya's help, began to fight back. With her sharp mind and her deep understanding of the legal system, they quickly gained the upper hand. Maya pointed out discrepancies in the evidence, connections between the witnesses that couldn't have been made up. Dante followed her lead, nodding in agreement, allowing her to take the reins in a way he never would have imagined. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one making all the moves. Maya was. As the final day of the trial approached, the tension in the air was palpable. Dante's empire, his freedom, hung in the balance. But with Maya at his side, he felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. He couldn't believe it. He, the feared Mafia boss, was relying on a maid to save him. But it wasn't just any maid. It was Maya, the woman who had made him feel something other than fear for the first time in years. The woman who had given him hope. And as the final arguments were made, as the judge prepared to render his decision, Dante couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for a woman who had no reason to help him, who had no obligation to him, but who had stepped forward anyway. The courtroom fell silent as the judge looked over the evidence one last time. He turned to the jury, his eyes sweeping across the room. Then, in a voice that carried over the tension, he spoke. The charges against Dante Romano are hereby dismissed. Maya stood there, stunned. She had done it. They had done it. Dante was free. And as the courtroom erupted into shocked gasps and murmurs, Maya caught Dante's gaze. This time, there was no skepticism, no confusion, just a look of pure respect. And maybe, just maybe, something more. I'll never forget the look on Dante's face when the judge made his ruling. The courtroom erupted into chaos, people on both sides standing up, exchanging words, some in disbelief, others in triumph. Dante stood motionless, his eyes locked onto Maya's as if he could hardly believe what had just transpired. He was free, not by the hands of his expensive lawyers or his loyal men, but by the quiet strength of the woman who had served his family without question. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she stood beside him. It felt surreal, like the world around her was moving in slow motion while she stood frozen in place. She had done it. She had saved him. For years, she had been hiding behind the shadows of others. Always the quiet one. Always the invisible one. But now, in this moment, she had done something no one would ever forget. No one, not even Dante, could have predicted what had just happened. Maya's mind raced as she tried to process the enormity of it all. She had been a lawyer once, before everything went wrong. Before she made that one mistake that had ruined her career and sent her into a spiral of shame and regret. But now, standing in front of the most powerful man in New York, she felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't felt in years. It was a sense of power, a sense of purpose. Dante turned to face her fully now, his gaze soft but intense. "I owe you everything," he said, his voice low, a hint of emotion breaking through his usual cold exterior. Maya was taken aback. It wasn't often that Dante expressed gratitude, especially not to someone like her. She had been nothing more than a maid to him, just another face in the background. But now, standing before him, she was something else entirely. "You don't owe me anything," Maya replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did what anyone would do, what anyone with a conscience would do." Dante studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "No," he said finally, his voice firm. "What you did was more than that. You saved me when no one else would. You didn't have to. You didn't even know me." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected anything like this from Dante. A man who had built his empire on power, control, and fear was now standing in front of her, vulnerable in a way she never imagined. "I didn't do it for you," Maya said, her eyes meeting his with a quiet determination. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." There was a long pause between them, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Finally, Dante stepped closer, his presence filling the space around her. "Maybe," he said, his voice softer now. "But that's what makes it different. You didn't have to care. But you did." Maya felt a flush of warmth rise to her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain composed. Dante, the man who had everyone bowing to him, was speaking to her like this, like she mattered. It was overwhelming, to say the least. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dante looked at her, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "But one thing is certain. I won't forget this. I don't forget loyalty. And I don't forget those who have helped me when they had no reason to." Maya didn't know what to say to that. She wasn't expecting anything from him, but his words made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of belonging. A sense of worth. It was strange, but in this cold, intimidating world that Dante had built around him, it was as if she had finally found a place where she mattered. Dante's voice broke her thoughts. "Come with me," he said, his tone commanding but not unkind. Maya hesitated for a moment, unsure what he meant, but then nodded. She had no idea where this would lead, but for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to find out. Dante led her out of the courtroom, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. She wasn't sure why he was doing this, why he was taking her with him, but she didn't question it. She had already stepped into his world in a way she never expected, and now, she would have to see where it took her. As they left the courtroom, the reporters outside immediately took notice, snapping photos of the two of them together. Maya felt the weight of their gaze, but she stood tall. For once, she didn't feel like an outsider. Dante, for the first time in years, had someone who could see him beyond the power, beyond the reputation. He had someone who wasn't afraid to speak up, someone who could challenge him, someone who could make him feel human again. And Maya, the woman who had once been invisible, had just become the most important person in his life. What would happen next? Maya didn't know. But she was ready to find out. For the first time in years, she was ready to step into the unknown, to take a chance, to take control of her own destiny. And for the first time, Dante wasn't standing alone. The drive from the courthouse was quiet. Dante sat in the back of the black SUV, his mind racing. Maya sat beside him, her gaze focused out the window. The world outside was rushing by, but inside the car, everything seemed to move in slow motion. She had done it. She had saved him. The same woman who had once been invisible in his world, the woman who cleaned his mansion and served his meals, had just turned the tide of a high-stakes trial. And now, she sat beside him, her heart racing with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Dante couldn't help but glance at her every few seconds. He had always been a man in control, a man who had never needed anyone. But today he had needed Maya. And somehow, she had come through. He had been a mafia boss, feared by all, respected by few. But Maya, with her quiet intelligence and unshakable courage, had stood up for him when everyone else had failed. The world he had built around himself, the empire that had taken him years to construct, had almost come crumbling down in a single moment. He was not used to this feeling. Vulnerability. And now, sitting in this car with Maya, it was all he could think about. He had never considered her much more than just the maid. He had never noticed the sharpness in her eyes, the way she moved through the house with quiet efficiency. He had never taken the time to see who she really was. But now he couldn't look away. He felt something stirring within him, something he hadn't felt in years. Respect, admiration, maybe even something more. Maya, for her part, couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. She had saved Dante Romano. The man who controlled the streets of New York, who had men at his beck and call, had just been saved by her, a woman who had been cast aside by her own past. She had been a lawyer once, a good one, but a single mistake had torn her life apart, sending her into the shadows. Now, she was here, sitting beside the very man she had once feared. And yet, despite the tension in the air, she felt an odd sense of calm. Dante had shown her a side of him she had never imagined existed. She had seen the ruthless mafia boss, but she had also seen the man who had been left alone when his world came crashing down. For the first time, she understood that behind the power and the fear, Dante was just a man, just like anyone else. As the car pulled up to the grand mansion, Dante turned to Maya. "You did more than just save me today," he said quietly. Maya met his gaze, her heart fluttering in her chest. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wasn't going to let you fall." Dante studied her for a long moment. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice soft but firm. "What you did today, it changed everything. I don't know how to repay you." Maya felt a pang in her chest. She had never expected anything in return. She had done what she thought was right, not for a reward, but because it was the right thing to do. She had always been the one to put others first, to stay in the background. But now, standing here with Dante, she realized that she had finally taken control of her own destiny. Dante's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "I don't forget those who helped me," he said, his tone low. "And you, Maya, you've earned my respect. More than that, you've earned my trust." Maya swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to hearing words like that, especially not from someone like Dante. The world he lived in, the one that had consumed him for years, was a world that didn't have room for kindness. But somehow, she had found a way to make him see beyond the walls he had built. Dante stepped closer to her, his gaze never leaving hers. "I need someone like you in my world, Maya," he said. "Someone who can see through the lies. Someone who isn't afraid to stand up for what's right." Maya's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what he meant, but something in the way he said it made her believe him. She had spent so long hiding, so long pretending to be someone she wasn't, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. But here, with Dante, she felt like she was finally being noticed. "I don't know what you're offering, Dante," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm not sure I can be part of your world." Dante looked at her, his eyes softening. "I'm not asking you to be part of my world," he said. "I'm asking you to be part of something bigger, something more important." Maya was silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. But as she looked into Dante's eyes, she realized that she wasn't afraid anymore. She had saved him, and in doing so, she had saved herself. She had taken control of her life for the first time in years. And now, as she stood here with Dante, She knew that whatever happened next, she would face it on her own terms. Dante stepped back, giving her space. "I'll leave you to think about it," he said. "But know this, Maya. I don't make offers like this lightly. Whatever happens next, you'll always have my protection." Maya nodded slowly, her mind racing. The world she had known was shifting, and she didn't know where it would take her. But for the first time in her life, she felt ready to face whatever came next. She had taken a chance today, and now, for the first time in years, she was ready to take another. I sat in the luxurious study of Dante Romano's mansion, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Dante had given me more than his gratitude. He had extended an invitation to something I wasn't sure I was ready for. He had told me that he wanted me to be part of his world, to be part of something bigger. But what did that really mean? I had spent so many years living in the shadows, my life defined by what I had lost, what I had failed to achieve. And now, standing on the precipice of something that could change everything, I wasn't sure I was ready to take that step. The room was silent, save for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I glanced at Dante, who was standing near the window, his back to me. He was looking out over the sprawling estate, his expression unreadable. It was strange. In this massive, opulent space, he looked just as isolated as I had felt for so many years. It was a reminder that power, wealth, and influence didn't always come with peace of mind. Dante turned to me, his eyes meeting mine with that same intensity one had come to recognize. "You're quiet," he said, his voice softer than usual. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I'm just thinking," I said finally. "I've never been part of a world like this before." Dante took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "No one is born into this world, Maya. You learn it. You adapt. And sometimes, you're given a choice that changes everything." His words hung in the air. The choice he was offering me wasn't just about being part of his world. It was about stepping into a life that was foreign to me, one that came with danger, secrets, and consequences. Could I handle it? Could I trust him enough to let my guard down and allow myself to be a part of it? "I'm not asking you to be like me," Dante continued, as if reading my thoughts. "I'm asking you to be yourself. To stand by my side because I know you can." His words resonated with me. They made me realize something. In all my years of hiding, I had forgotten how to trust. I had forgotten what it was like to be seen for who I truly was, not just for the mistakes of my past. "I've made mistakes," I said quietly, more to myself than to him. "Big ones." Dante's gaze softened. "Everyone has. But that's not what defines you. It's what you do after the mistakes that counts." I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit, but there was none. There was only sincerity in his eyes, a sincerity I had never imagined a man like him capable of. "What do you need from me?" I asked, the words finally leaving my lips. Dante studied me for a long moment before answering. "I need someone I can trust," he said simply. "Someone who can think for themselves, who isn't afraid to speak up when things go wrong. Someone who isn't afraid of the darkness that comes with this life." "And you think that's me?" I asked, unsure if I was capable of living up to what he was asking. He nodded slowly. "I do." The words hung between us, charged with unspoken meaning. I had no idea what this path would lead to, but one thing was clear. I had made my choice. And I wasn't going to turn back now. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Dante and I began to work closely together, going over the details of his empire, discussing the intricacies of his business dealings, and navigating the delicate balance of power that held everything together. I had always known that Dante was powerful, but seeing it up close was a different experience entirely. His world was dangerous, ruthless, and unforgiving, yet there was a strange sense of order to it all. Everything had its place, its purpose. And in this world, I found myself becoming something more than just the maid. I was becoming someone with a voice, someone who could make a difference. As the days went by, I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Dante. He was still the same Mafia boss, cold and calculating, but there were moments, fleeting as they were, where I saw something else in him. A vulnerability, a humanity, and for some reason, that made me feel closer to him than I had ever felt to anyone. There was a growing connection between us, one that neither of us could deny. But even as that connection deepened, I knew that we were still two people from completely different worlds. Dante had always lived in the shadows, ruling with fear and power. And I had spent years hiding from the world, trying to make amends for my past mistakes. What could we possibly have in common? But somehow, we found common ground. In the quiet moments, when the world seemed to slow down, we shared parts of ourselves that no one else would ever see. And in those moments, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had found something I never thought I would have again, a sense of belonging. Dante's voice interrupted my thoughts. Maya, he said, his tone serious. There's something I need to tell you. I turned to face him, my heart skipping a beat. What is it? I asked, suddenly on edge. He looked at me, his eyes intense. I'm not the man you think I am, he said. I've made sacrifices to get where I am. And I've hurt people along the way. The words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them pressing down on me. But I didn't flinch. I didn't turn away. I was ready to face whatever came next. Dante had already shown me that there was more to him than the cold, ruthless persona he put on for the world. And whatever happened next, I knew I would face it by his side. I had always known that working with Dante would be complicated. The underworld he navigated was dark, filled with shadows that threatened to swallow anyone who wasn't careful. But what I didn't expect was the way everything began to shift, how my role in this world, and the space I held in Dante's life, would evolve. As days passed, it became clear that my involvement with Dante was no longer just about saving him from legal trouble. It was about something much deeper, something that neither of us had been prepared for. Dante had changed, not in any dramatic, outward way, but there were subtle shifts in his demeanor, in the way he looked at me, in the moments we shared when no one else was around. There was still that cold, impenetrable mask he wore, the one that kept the world at bay, but behind it, I saw a man who wasn't as certain of everything as he once was. He had been an island, surrounded by the walls of his empire, but now, he was reaching out. Not to anyone, but to me, and I didn't know how to feel about it. In the beginning, I had thought I was just doing what was right, saving him because he had no one else. But somewhere along the way, that purpose had changed. I was beginning to care about him in ways I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't just standing by his side anymore. I was invested in his life, in his future. I had come to realize that Dante wasn't the only one whose world had been rocked by the events of the past few weeks. I, too, was feeling the weight of the decisions I had made. I had stepped into this world with nothing but the hope of finding something worth fighting for, and now, I was wondering if that fight would cost me more than I was willing to pay. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light through the windows of Dante's mansion, he called me into his office. He had a stack of papers in front of him, the glow from the desk lamp making the room feel smaller, more intimate. It was a stark contrast to the usual cold atmosphere of his home. I hesitated for a moment before walking in, unsure of what to expect. Dante looked up as I entered, his usual expression unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that caught my attention. Maya, he began, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of something deeper. We need to talk about the future. The words hung in the air, and I felt my heart rate increase. The future? What did that mean? Dante had always been focused on the present, on the power he wielded and the empire he ruled. The future had never seemed like something he concerned himself with, at least not in a personal sense. What about the future? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Dante leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the desk. I've been thinking about everything that's happened. About how you saved me. About how you've been by my side, even when you didn't have to be. He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. You're not just the maid anymore, Maya. You never were. You're someone I can rely on. Someone I want by my side, not just for this business, but for the things that matter. For the things I never let myself care about. His words hit me harder than I expected. I had always been just the maid, the quiet one in the background, never seen or heard unless someone needed something from me. But Dante was telling me, in his own way, that I was more than that. I was part of something bigger. I was part of his world now. And that terrified me. What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dante stood up, walked around the desk, and came to stand in front of me. He was close now, his presence overwhelming. I mean that I want you to be part of everything, he said. I want you to help me build this empire, not just from the sidelines, but from the inside. You have the intelligence, the skill, and the heart to make a real difference, Maya. I swallowed hard, my thoughts racing. This wasn't just about legal advice anymore. This wasn't just about saving him from a court case. Dante was offering me something I wasn't sure I could handle, something that would change everything. Could I accept that? Could I step into this world, knowing what it could cost me? Why me? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Why now? Dante's gaze softened, his usual confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. Because you're the only one who has ever shown me that there's more to life than power. You've made me see things differently. And for the first time in years, I'm not sure I want to do this alone anymore. His words struck a chord deep inside me. I had always believed that power was everything. I had built my life around it, around making amends for the mistakes of my past. But now, standing here with Dante, I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was something more. Something worth fighting for. I don't know if I can be a part of this world, I admitted quietly. I don't know if I'm ready for what it means. Dante reached out, his hand brushing mine, his touch surprisingly gentle. I don't expect you to have all the answers, Maya, he said. But I do know that whatever happens, I want you by my side. You're the only one I trust. And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't turn back. I had already stepped into his world, and there was no walking away now. Whatever happened next, I was in this with him. Together, I stood beside Dante, feeling the weight of the decision I had made pressing down on me. We were no longer just two people thrown together by circumstance. We were something more now, something that neither of us fully understood, but both knew would change everything. Dante had given me a choice to be part of his world, a world that I had once only observed from the shadows, a world that was dangerous, unpredictable, and cold. It was a world of power, but also of vulnerability. And now, standing at the edge of it, I realized how much I had to lose. But at the same time, I knew there was something in me that had changed. I wasn't the same woman I had been when I first walked into that courtroom. The woman who had been silent, invisible, hiding behind the mask of being just another servant. I was someone else now. I had a voice. I had a purpose. And it was clear that Dante saw that in me, too. He had trusted me when no one else had. He had let me into his world, not as a bystander, but as an equal, someone who could contribute, who could make a difference. It was strange, feeling like this. For so long, I had just existed. But now, I was living, breathing, fighting for something. Fighting for someone. I'm glad you're with me, Dante said, his voice low, but there was something in it that made my heart skip. He didn't just mean it as a formality or a command. He meant it. And somehow, that meant more than anything else. I'm not sure I've ever had someone like you by my side, he continued, his gaze steady as he looked at me. Someone who isn't afraid to stand up to me. Someone who isn't afraid of what's coming. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I'm not afraid, I said quietly, but the truth was, a part of me was terrified. I didn't know what this world would do to me. I didn't know what it would cost. But I couldn't turn back now. We're in this together, I added, finding my voice. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Dante's eyes softened for a moment, and I could see something there that he didn't show anyone else. A flicker of something that almost felt like trust. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by that familiar cold resolve. He turned, his back to me as he walked toward the window, looking out at the city that he controlled. I don't know what's coming next, he said, his voice low. But I do know this. I've made too many enemies. And they won't stop until they have everything. Until they take everything from me. The weight of his words hung in the air. I could see the darkness that surrounded him, the constant battle he fought every day to stay on top. I had seen it before, but now, it was different. Now, I was a part of it. A part of him. I stepped forward, standing beside him, my presence a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone. Then we'll fight back, I said, my voice steady. We'll take control of the situation before they can take control of us. Dante turned to face me, his gaze piercing. For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent understanding. And then, with a slow nod, he spoke again. You're right. We'll fight. But his expression shifted, and I could see the flicker of something more in his eyes. And I'll protect you. No one will touch you. Not while you're with me. I could feel the promise in his words, like a shield being formed between us. But the world we were stepping into wasn't one where promises meant much. It was a world where loyalty was everything, but loyalty could also get you killed. I wasn't naive enough to believe that anything was truly safe, that any of us were truly untouchable. But in that moment, standing there with Dante, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. And that was all I needed to keep moving forward. As the days went by, things began to escalate. The threats started coming from every direction. Anonymous messages, cryptic phone calls, and strange cars parked outside the mansion. Dante was used to this kind of pressure, but I wasn't. It was new to me, this constant unease, this feeling that the world was closing in on us. But Dante didn't flinch. He handled everything with the same cold precision that had made him the most feared man in the city. And I found myself learning from him, adapting to the world that had once been so foreign to me. We were in it together now, facing whatever came our way. I could feel the weight of the choices I had made, the consequences of stepping into this life. But in the midst of it all, one thing was clear. I had found something worth fighting for. And as I stood by Dante's side, I knew I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I was a part of the fight, and I was ready for whatever came next. I had never seen Dante this focused before. The usual swagger, the cold, calculated presence that he exuded at all times was gone. In its place was a man on edge, someone who was finally confronting the inevitable consequences of his past. As we sat across from each other in his study, the tension between us was palpable. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was personal. The people Dante had wronged were closing in. His empire, once untouchable, was beginning to show cracks. The phone calls, the whispers in the shadows, the subtle threats, they were escalating. Dante had always played the game of power and control, but now, he wasn't in control anymore. The game was changing. And in that moment, I realized that I was no longer just a spectator. I was part of it, too. The realization came crashing down on me. I had chosen this life. I had chosen Dante. And there was no turning back. I had seen the darkness in his world, the ruthlessness, the manipulation. But I had also seen the flicker of something softer in him, the vulnerability that only a few people got to see. It made me question everything. What was I really doing here? What was I willing to risk? The man sitting across from me wasn't just a mafia boss. He was a person who had made sacrifices, and a person who, despite everything, was still searching for something that would make all the chaos worth it. I can't keep doing this, Dante said, his voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or to himself. I've made too many enemies, too many mistakes, and now, they're coming for me. His gaze was distant, like he was seeing something beyond the walls of the room. I could hear the weight in his voice, the frustration of a man who had built his empire with his own blood, sweat, and tears, only to watch it crumble around him. I couldn't imagine what that felt like. I had lived my own personal failures, but they were nothing compared to what Dante was facing. Dante, I said, my voice steady despite the unease swirling inside me. You don't have to do this alone. He turned to face me, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, there was silence. I knew what he was thinking. He had never allowed anyone to get too close. He had trusted too few people in his life. And now, he was questioning whether he could trust me. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I trusted him completely either. But I couldn't walk away now. Not after everything that had happened. Not after everything we had been through. You've already done more than I ever expected, Dante said softly. I never asked you to be a part of this, Maya. But you're in it now. And I don't know if that's something you're ready for. His words hung in the air, a reminder of how far we had come from the simple dynamic of Mafia boss and Maid. In the beginning, I had never imagined being in this position. I had never imagined standing beside him as an equal, someone he might actually trust. I'm ready, I said, more confidently than I felt. I've already made my choice, Dante. I'm not going anywhere. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. And then, as if making a decision, he nodded slowly. Then we fight together, he said. His voice was firm, and for the first time in days, I saw a glimmer of the man I had come to admire. He wasn't ready to give up yet. He was still willing to fight. I was relieved, but I also knew that it wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about taking back control. The world we had built, the life we were living, it was all hanging by a thread. And in that moment, I understood that the stakes had never been higher. The danger was real, and we were both in it. There was no turning back. Over the next few days, everything seemed to move and fast forward. The tension was palpable. We were no longer just trying to survive. We were preparing for war. I spent hours going through documents with Dante, going over every detail of his business dealings, looking for any weakness we could exploit. We couldn't afford to make a mistake. Every move we made had to be calculated. Every word had to be chosen carefully. The Mafia was ruthless, but I had learned that so was Dante. And he wasn't going to back down. But I also saw something in him that made me want to fight for him, something that no one else had seen. In all his years of power and control, no one had bothered to see the man behind the mask. No one had cared enough to look beyond the walls he had built. But I had. And maybe that was the key to winning this war. Understanding who we were fighting for. As the final night before the meeting with our allies approached, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't place. Anxiety, fear, and a sense of urgency. But there was also something else. Something I hadn't expected. Hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, we could turn this around. Maybe we could win this fight together. But I also knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough. We had to be smart. We had to be ruthless. And we had to trust each other. I looked across the room at Dante, who was already preparing for what was coming. I wasn't sure where this journey would take us, but I knew one thing for sure. I was in this to the end. I stood beside Dante, feeling the weight of the choices we had made pressing down on both of us. The meeting was set for the following night. We were about to confront those who had threatened everything he had built, his empire, his power, and his very survival. I had never been part of anything like this before. I had never imagined I would be sitting at the table with men who ruled the city, who controlled everything from the shadows. But now, here I was, at Dante's side, ready to face what lay ahead. There was no going back. I had chosen this life, and now, more than ever, I was committed to fighting for it. Dante, as always, had his game face on. His eyes were focused, his movements calculated. He exuded power, but I could see the strain beneath it. The stress of knowing that every decision from here on out could be his last. That pressure was something he carried alone, even though he didn't have to. He had me now. I had proved that to him when I helped him in court. But I had a feeling that the battle we were about to face would be different. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about domination. And it was clear that Dante wasn't just fighting for his business. He was fighting for something deeper. His desire for control, for respect, was something that ran through his veins. It was in everything he did. He couldn't let go of it. I understood that now. As we prepared for the meeting, the tension in the air was palpable. Dante paced back and forth in the study, going over every detail. "You know what's at stake," he said, his voice cold, but the urgency was there. "This isn't just about protecting the business. It's about sending a message. We cannot afford to look weak." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and resolve building inside me. I had never been in a position like this before. But with Dante, I was more than just a bystander. I was part of this fight. I was going to be a part of his world, for better or worse. "I understand," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Dante stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes narrowing as if he was studying me for any sign of doubt. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his voice soft but intense. "Because once we step into that room, there's no turning back. There will be no more hiding, no more playing it safe." I took a deep breath. "I'm sure. We're in this together, Dante. Whatever happens, we'll face it head on." The words felt like a promise, but even I wasn't sure if I could keep it. There was so much at stake. If we failed, it wouldn't just be his empire that would fall. It would be our lives. And I knew that. I could feel the weight of it in every fiber of my being. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when I had come this far. The night of the meeting arrived, and the air was thick with anticipation. We entered the room where the city's most powerful figures were already gathered. They were seated around a long, polished table, their faces hidden in the shadows, their voices low. I could feel the tension rising as Dante and I stepped inside. The men at the table didn't say anything immediately. They just watched us, sizing us up. It was clear they didn't expect me to be there. I wasn't part of their world. I wasn't one of the usual players. But I didn't care. I had earned my place here. And I wasn't going to let anyone forget that. Dante moved confidently to the head of the table, his presence commanding the room. He didn't need to say a word for them to know that he was in control. He always had been. But now, I noticed a shift in the way they looked at him. It wasn't just fear anymore. There was something else. Respect. The same respect that Dante had fought so hard to earn. The respect that had come at a steep price. He had earned his position, but he was about to prove that he wasn't. going to let anyone take it from him. Let's get to the point, Dante said, his voice calm, but with an edge. You all know why we're here. This ends tonight. You either support me, or you stand in my way. But make no mistake, if you choose to stand against me, you'll regret it. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. But then one of the men spoke up, his voice shaky. You think you can control all of us? He asked, clearly trying to challenge Dante's authority. Dante's eyes flashed with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I don't need to control all of you, he said, his voice cold as ice. I only need to control the ones who matter. The room went deathly quiet as Dante's words settled in. He had just drawn a line in the sand, and anyone who wasn't on his side would be eliminated. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I watched the scene unfold. This was it. This was the moment we had prepared for. The moment that would define everything. This meeting is over, Dante said, standing up from the table. The men around him shifted nervously, unsure of what to do. But Dante wasn't finished. You can either stand with me, or you can leave. But if you leave, don't expect to come back. I won't give you a second chance. The room fell into chaos as the men began to argue amongst themselves. But Dante remained calm, his eyes fixed on them with a fierce determination. He had won. The power had shifted. And as the tension in the room reached its peak, I knew that this was only the beginning. The beginning of a new era. An era where we would fight to the end, no matter the cost. I stood in the center of the room, feeling the weight of Dante's decision pressing down on me. The meeting had ended abruptly, with the power dynamics in the room shifted irreversibly. It wasn't just about the deal anymore. It was about survival, respect, and dominance. Dante had made his move, and he had made it clear there was no going back. The tension in the air was thick as the men around the table exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what would happen next. They knew Dante well enough to know that he wasn't the kind of man who let challenges slide. He was a man of action, and when he spoke, the world listened. As Dante and I made our way out of the room, the weight of the moment settled in. There was no turning back from what we had just started. I had stepped into this world willingly, but now, as the reality of the situation began to sink in, I felt the gravity of what it meant to be by Dante's side. We weren't just fighting for control anymore. We were fighting for our lives. Once we reached the safety of his private quarters, Dante turned to me, his gaze cold and focused. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice firm, yet there was a hint of something softer in his eyes, a vulnerability he rarely showed. They'll come for us now. We have to be ready for whatever comes next. I nodded, understanding the stakes more clearly than ever before. The game we were playing wasn't a simple one. It wasn't about money or power, it was about survival. And Dante was determined to make sure he stayed on top. I'm with you, I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the anxiety building within me. I've made my choice. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't just the cold calculation of a mafia boss. It was a flicker of something warmer, something more human. You don't know what you're getting into, he said softly. But I admire your courage. I met his gaze without hesitation. I know what I'm getting into, I replied, my voice unwavering. I've seen the darkness in this world, but I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of you. Dante's expression softened, just for a moment, before he turned away, his face once again a mask of determination. Good, he said, because we'll need all the courage we can get. This is far from over. The next few days were a blur of preparations, meetings, and strategic moves. Dante was relentless, making sure every detail was in place, every angle covered. He was a man of action, and he wasted no time in securing his position. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. I was beginning to realize that Dante wasn't just fighting for control of the city, he was fighting for something deeper, something that had been buried beneath years of power, betrayal, and loss. And somehow, I had become a part of that fight. We had grown closer in the past few weeks, and though I still couldn't fully understand what Dante wanted from me, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't walk away now. Dante had pulled me into his world, but it wasn't just his world that I was stepping into. I was building my own place in it. In the midst of the chaos, there were moments of quiet between us, moments where Dante allowed himself to be more than just the boss. In those moments, I saw a side of him that no one else did. A side that was not as cold, not as invulnerable as the world believed. I saw a man who was trying to make sense of his past, who was carrying burdens he had never shared with anyone. It made me understand him better, and it made me wonder what my place in his life really was. Was I just a pawn in his game, or was there something more to our connection? I didn't have the answers yet, but I was beginning to realize that I was no longer the woman I had been when I first walked into his mansion. I wasn't the maid, the quiet observer in the background. I was someone with a voice, with a role to play in this world. And with Dante by my side, I was learning how to use that voice. As the days passed, the tension in the air grew thicker. We had made our move, but we had also made enemies. And the enemies we had were not the kind you could just walk away from. They were ruthless, calculating, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. "They'll come for us," Dante said one evening, as we stood by the window, looking out over the city. "They won't stop until they've torn everything down. But we're not going to let them." I nodded, feeling the determination in his words. This was no longer just about defending his empire. It was about taking control of our own fate. Dante turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice steady but filled with an intensity one hadn't heard before. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. But I wasn't afraid. "I'm ready," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Let's take control. Together." I had never felt the weight of responsibility quite like this before. As Dante and I prepared for what was undoubtedly the most important meeting of his career, everything seemed to move at lightning speed. The tension that had been simmering for weeks was now boiling over. We had made our move, but there was no way to predict what the next move would be. The men we were up against were ruthless, and we knew they wouldn't back down easily. The game had changed, and now we were all in. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of what was to come, of what Dante had asked of me. There was so much at stake. His empire. His life. Ours. I didn't know if I was ready for it all. But as I lay there in the silence of the mansion, I realized that I had already made my choice. I had stepped into this world with my eyes wide open, and I wasn't going to turn back now. Dante needed me, and I wasn't going to let him down. I had to be strong, not just for him, but for us. I wasn't just standing by his side anymore. I was fighting alongside him. The morning of the meeting arrived, and I was still uneasy, but my resolve had strengthened. We were preparing for war. Every move we made would be scrutinized, every word we spoke measured. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. Dante had been through a lot in his life, and now, he was at the crossroads. This meeting would decide everything. As we drove to the location, a sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach. Dante was calm, his usual confidence in place, but I could see the tension in his eyes. This was it, the moment that would define everything. As we entered the building, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The men who had once been allies were now enemies, and we were about to face them in the battle of our lives. The room was dimly lit, filled with smoke and tension. The men at the table didn't bother to greet us. They just watched us with calculating eyes. The silence was oppressive. Dante walked confidently to the center of the room, his presence undeniable. I followed closely behind, aware of every movement, every step. This wasn't a place for mistakes. As Dante sat at the table, I took my seat beside him, a quiet strength beside his more obvious power. I had earned my place at this table, and I was going to make sure I held my ground. The first words were spoken by one of the men, his voice thick with disdain. "So, this is how it's going to be," he sneered, looking at Dante. "You think you can control all of us? You think you can just walk in here and demand our loyalty?" Dante's gaze was cold, his voice like ice as he responded. "I'm not asking for loyalty. I'm taking it." The room shifted. I could feel the power in his words, the authority that oozed from him. The men around the table shifted uneasily, not used to this kind of confrontation. They were used to the games, the subtle moves, the whispered negotiations. But Dante was not playing. This was not a game to him anymore. This was war, and we were in it together. "You don't have a choice," Dante continued, his eyes sweeping across the room. "You either stand with me, or you stand against me. But if you stand against me, you'll find that I have no problem destroying everything you've built." The tension in the room was unbearable. I could see the hesitation in their eyes. They knew what Dante was capable of, but they also knew what it meant to go up against him. They didn't want to be his enemy, but they weren't sure if they could afford to be his ally. Dante leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. You've made your choices. And now, you will live with them, he said calmly. But understand this, I will not back down. I will fight for what is mine, and I will make sure that those who stand in my way regret it. For a moment, no one spoke. The room was thick with tension, but slowly, one by one, the men around the table began to speak. They weren't ready to make a move yet, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Dante had shown them that he wasn't afraid. He had shown them that he was ready for whatever came next. And that was all it took. One by one, the men began to concede, agreeing to stand with him. The power had shifted. Dante had won. But it wasn't over yet. As the meeting drew to a close, I could see the exhaustion in Dante's eyes. He had won this battle, but there were many more to come. This was just the beginning. As we left the building, the weight of the moment settled in. We had made it through, but I knew this wasn't the end. The war was far from over, and I was ready to fight, by Dante's side, for as long as it took. I couldn't sleep that night. The city outside Dante's mansion was quiet, the streets bathed in the faint glow of streetlights, but inside the mansion, everything felt heavy. The weight of the decision we had just made pressed down on me. The meeting earlier had been a turning point. Dante had gained what he wanted, control, and a show of dominance. But there was something in the air that told me this victory was only the beginning. As the night stretched on, I found myself pacing the floor of my room. I had never been in a situation like this before. There was no turning back now. I had crossed a line. The world I had stepped into was dangerous, unpredictable, and unforgiving. But it was my world now, too. I had chosen this path. But what did that mean for me? And what did it mean for Dante and I, standing together in this new reality? I still didn't have all the answers. But I couldn't afford to hesitate. I had made my choice. And now, more than ever, I needed to prove to myself that I could handle whatever came next. The next morning, Dante's face was unreadable as usual. He was already in the study when I arrived, his back to me as he pored over documents. The room was filled with a sense of quiet urgency, the air thick with the knowledge that we were on the edge of something big. We're ready, Dante said without turning around. The next step is coming, and we need to be prepared. His voice was calm, but I could feel the weight of his words. His empire was more fragile than ever, and the forces working against him weren't going to back down. I nodded, trying to steady myself. The pressure was mounting, but I had to stay focused. What's the plan? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dante turned to face me, his eyes sharp. We move fast, he said. There's no time to waste. Our enemies think they have the upper hand, but they're wrong. We're going to hit them where it hurts. I felt a chill at the seriousness in his tone. He wasn't just talking about business anymore. This wasn't just another deal. This was war. And Dante wasn't just the boss anymore. He was a man backed into a corner, ready to do whatever it took to protect what he had built. I'm with you, I said quietly, the words feeling more like a vow than just an affirmation. He nodded, his face softening ever so slightly. I know you are, he said. But this is going to be harder than anything we've faced. There are no guarantees. I knew what he meant. The stakes had never been higher. But what could I do? I had already made my choice. I had already decided that I was in this, no matter what. As the day wore on, the tension in the air grew heavier. The plan was set. The pieces were in place. But as the evening approached, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't control. The men Dante had once trusted were now questioning his every move. The loyalty he had built his empire on was starting to crumble. He had earned his place at the top, but even the strongest empires had weaknesses. And Dante's was beginning to show. But he wasn't about to back down. We weren't about to back down. As night fell, we gathered with his closest allies, those who had chosen to remain loyal, those who understood the gravity of the situation. The room was filled with the sharp scent of expensive cigars and the quiet murmur of men who knew that their lives, their futures, depended on the decisions made in the coming hours. Dante stood at the head of the table, his presence filling the room. He didn't need to say much. His reputation preceded him, and the men in the room knew what was at stake. We've come to a crossroads, Dante began, his voice carrying authority. The people we trusted are turning on us. The game has changed, and we're not going to lose. Not now. His eyes swept across the room, locking with each of his men in turn. Tonight, we make our move. We show them that we're not afraid. We show them that they can't push us around. We take back control. The room was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, the men around the table began to nod in agreement. They were with him. And I was with him too. There was no turning back. We were in this together. As the meeting broke, I followed Dante out of the room, my mind racing with everything that had been said. I had never seen him like this before. There was a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a determination that made everything else seem insignificant. "You're ready for this, aren't you?" Dante asked as we walked down the hall. His voice was quieter now, but there was no mistaking the underlying intensity. I stopped walking for a moment, turning to look at him. "I'm ready," I said firmly. "We've come this far. We're not going to back down now." Dante's gaze softened, but just for a moment. "Good," he said quietly. "Because once we make this move, there's no going back. We're either going to win, or we're going to lose everything." I didn't answer, but the truth was, I already knew the answer. We were going to win. We had to. There was no other option. As I looked at Dante, standing in front of me with all the power and determination that had gotten him this far, I knew that we were in this for the long haul. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And for the first time in my life, I was sure of one thing. I was ready to fight. We were ready to fight. I stood beside Dante, feeling the weight of everything we had been through and everything that was yet to come. The air around us was thick with anticipation as we prepared for the final move. The room was filled with those who had once been our allies, now divided, unsure of which side they would choose. The stakes had never been higher. It was no longer just about controlling the city, it was about survival. Our world had become a dangerous game, and we had no choice but to play it to win. Dante's gaze swept across the room, his usual confidence unwavering, but I could see the intensity in his eyes. He was ready. We were ready. The people who had once held power in this city were realizing, too late, that they had underestimated him. What they didn't know was that Dante had already set his plans in motion. Every move he had made, every piece he had placed on the board, had led to this moment. And we weren't going to lose. "It's time," Dante said, his voice low but steady. I nodded, the resolve within me matching his own. We had fought for this, and now, we would make sure that no one could take it from us. The final move was in motion. There was no turning back. The meeting had been called to settle the score once and for all. The rival factions who had tried to undermine Dante's empire were coming together to discuss terms. But we weren't there for terms. We were there to take control. As we entered the room, the atmosphere was tense. The men who had once been allies, who had once trusted Dante, now watched him with suspicion. But Dante didn't flinch. He stood tall, his eyes fixed on the leaders of the other factions, his presence commanding the room. "This ends tonight," Dante said, his voice cutting through the silence. "You've tried to undermine me. You've tried to take what is mine. But tonight, you will understand that there is only one way this ends, my way." The tension in the room was palpable. The men around the table shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. They knew better than to challenge him openly. The time for words had passed. The time for action was now. Dante stepped forward, his movements calculated, his eyes locked on his enemies. "I didn't get to where I am by playing nice," he continued. "I built this empire with blood, sweat, and sacrifice, and I'll protect it the same way. You can either stand with me or get out of the way." There was a moment of silence as the men weighed their options. But Dante had already won. The power was shifting, and everyone in the room knew it. They had no choice but to accept his terms. "I'll give you one chance," Dante said, his voice colder than ever. "One chance to leave this room with your dignity intact. After that, the game changes." The leader of the largest rival faction stood up, his face tight with anger. "You think you can control everything?" he sneered. "You've made enemies of too many powerful men." Dante's expression didn't change. "It's not about control," he said quietly. "It's about respect. Something you never understood." The room went silent again, the weight of his words settling over everyone. The men who had once been so sure of their power were now questioning themselves. Dante had stripped them of their confidence, and they knew it. There was nothing left to do but surrender. Slowly, the men around the table began to shift, some of them nodding, others looking defeated. The leader of the rival faction stepped back, his defiance broken. "We'll accept your terms," he muttered, his voice laced with resentment. Dante gave a single nod. "Good. Now, remember this. I don't make deals with those who betray me. So don't test me again. With that, the meeting ended. Dante had won. The power was his, and the city now knew it. But even as the men filed out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a pang of uncertainty. The fight was over, but the war wasn't. There would always be those who would try to take what we had built, always those who would challenge Dante's authority. But for now, we had won. As Dante turned to face me, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. But there was also something else there, something that told me that, for the first time in a long while, he was at peace. We did it, I said softly. Dante's lips curled into a small smile, his gaze meeting mine. We did, he said. But this is just the beginning. The world is still watching, still waiting for us to slip. And we won't give them that chance. I nodded, understanding the weight of his words. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just a new chapter. And as we walked out of the room, side by side, I knew one thing. For sure, we were ready for whatever came next. Immerse yourself in a thrilling tale of power, betrayal, and unexpected connections in this captivating story. Dive deep into a world where business empires, loyalty, and trust are constantly tested. As you follow the intense journey of Dante and Maya, two people from vastly different worlds who find themselves bound together by fate, this narrative unfolds into one of the most intriguing romance stories. The stakes are high as Maya, once an overlooked maid, rises to stand by the side of a powerful mafia boss. With everything on the line, they must navigate their complex relationship while facing enemies who threaten to tear apart their lives. As the tension builds, the trust between them grows, revealing an unexpected yet undeniable romance that blossoms amidst the chaos. This isn't just a tale of mafia power. It's a testament to the strength of love and loyalty in the face of overwhelming odds. With each twist and turn, this gripping story keeps you on the edge of your seat, offering not just the thrills of mafia intrigue, but the heartwarming and unexpected romance stories that will captivate you. Join them as they fight to secure their future in a battle that could cost them everything. If you're a fan of intense romance stories filled with suspense, this is one journey you won't want to miss. The connection between Dante and Maya evolves into something much deeper as they face their enemies and the dangerous world around them, solidifying their bond in the most unexpected way. Whether it's power, betrayal, or love that keeps you hooked, this tale delivers on all fronts, making it one of the most unforgettable romance stories of its kind.